everybody. My name is Vanessa. I coordinate the Cork Smart Gateway. The Cork Smart Gateway, it's an initiative that has been organizing this webinar series called Innovation Through Technology. The Cork Smart Gateway was established by Cork City Council, Cork County Council, UCC, Tyndall, and Nimbus Research Center from MTU. The initiative actually fosters innovation and fosters the idea of Cork as a smart region, using technologies to enhance different type of services, different type of businesses as well, local businesses. And in that sense, we've organized this webinar series to raise awareness of the different type of technologies that are available and how these can be applied in SMEs, in small businesses, and for you to actually leverage them. So today we'll have our webinar on upskilling opportunities for a digital transformation. Digital transformation is actually at the core of every discussion at a European and national and local level. And also we've been supported by the Enable program from the Connect Center of SFI. And but not having nothing further ado, I would like to welcome our moderator, Kieran O'Callaghan. She's a higher education professional with over 15 years of experience at a national and international level as well. She is currently working for the Center for Digital Education in UCC, and she leads the IUA project on enhancing digital teaching and learning from UCC. So thank you so much, Kieran. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and thank you for the invitation to moderate today's webinar. I'm so delighted to welcome you all here today to this entirely relevant webinar on upskilling opportunities for our digital transformation. Now more than ever, with this global pandemic that we're all living through, we can see the role of digital being more important than ever before. And I suppose that digital transformation and digital innovation piece, but equally the training and upskilling opportunities that are so important right now for everybody, regardless of really where you're working, whether it be business and education and so on. So I'm delighted to introduce our very first speaker today, who's Anthony O'Callaghan, a great surname, Anthony. And Anthony is going to be presenting on the role of IT in digital upskilling today. Anthony is currently the Chief Information Officer for the Carberry Group, which is an Irish headquartered dairy and nutrition business spanning multiple locations globally. Anthony has led various organizations through his career in companies such as Flex, Tyco, and Johnson Controls, and also serves as the current chairman of IT at Cork. So Anthony, we're delighted to welcome you here today and very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Kieran. So morning everybody, and I promise I won't bore you too much, or well, let's say I won't take too much time, let's say, walking through these slides. I know we're on a bit of a tight schedule, right? So look, I'll just briefly kind of jump straight into some of the slides I have, which are kind of primarily focusing on, I suppose, upskilling opportunities, but also focusing on what organizations like IT at Cork are kind of doing in this area, right? So as Cleona mentioned, I'm currently the chairman of IT at Cork, which is the largest technology not-for-profit cluster in Ireland, servicing about 230 members. You should be able to see my screen, I believe, now.
We can.
Okay, super. Yeah, so guys, look, I just wanted to walk through some kind of high level, let's say, statements in terms of what the industry is saying at the moment, right? So at the moment, let's say I suppose we're witnessing a historic development of remote working and digital access to services across every domain. So it's no secret to anyone that, you know, companies had a mass movement of employees overnight, and, you know, some folks, I suppose, you know, like a lot of you guys on the call, probably haven't seen their offices since March 2020. You know, stores went online, etc. In a very, very fast pace, right? We've also vaulted forward about 5 years, right, in digital adoption, I believe, anyway, and we did so in a matter of about 12 weeks, right? And look, I think this is largely kind of valid for an awful lot of organizations, right, that went through this whole COVID, this COVID rush at the very early stages of the pandemic. I think it's true for most industries, and I can certainly echo this within Carberry, as Cleona mentioned, right, and the current CIO of the Carberry Group, right. From a technology perspective, right, we did all the normal items, but we equally took items a lot further, right. So, you know, we started to deploy items like VR, AR, etc., right. So preparing for the case where a lot of our operators might have to work remotely, and have to operate machinery, right? So we start kind of taking it a step further in terms of the digital skills that may be required. I think it's no secret as well that, look, technology is advancing at a pace never seen before. This was definitely true pre-COVID, but we've seen the pace advance even further now, and it shows no signs of relenting. Where it's driving a significant need for greater digital skills as well across the entire enterprise, right? And this is, regardless of industry. New roles are definitely emerging, and they're emerging at a rapid pace, and we need to prepare for the skills needed to conduct these new roles, right? Again, this was true pre-COVID, but we've accelerated once again, right? For example, let's say the traditional salespeople, which would have been very much a face-to-face business, are now conducting their business virtually. Skills needed there, are still quite basic, right? But there's still digital skills that are required around let's say running digital webinars, digital marketing, etc., are required now more than ever. And again, driving a need for greater upskilling opportunities, or upskilling across those employees. And then I suppose lastly, let's say digital upskilling is no longer a nice to have. I think it's now directly linked to organizational survival, right? And look, this is true for most businesses during COVID, right? And we saw examples, and very, very simple examples of this, of stores having to go online very, very quickly. Let's say people within those stores having to understand how to run an e-commerce site, etc. And look, this all happened in a matter of days, right? And we're still seeing that continue as we go through various stages of the lockdown as well, right? And companies trying to digitize their business models, right? And driving the need for greater digital skills as well, right? So look, that's just a kind of brief snapshot in terms of what some of the industry is saying at the moment, okay? In terms of, let's say, look, I fully believe that the digital era has really arrived. So I suppose I just wanted to mention some brief points related to this, right? So as I said, look, we now have a remote workforce that has largely worked across all industries, and we've proven that this is sustainable in a large way, I believe, right? As we spent nearly a year in this remote working model, employers were giving some flexibility, right? But I believe the focus may shift back now to how we can start driving some efficiency while continuing to work remotely as well. I think that's going to be a trend that will start emerging throughout 21. Customers and suppliers are expecting you to have this digital model nailed by this time, and expect a hybrid model going forward as well, right? So I think the allowances that were kind of given during the early stages of the pandemic will start kind of drifting away, because we're now coming into being in this situation for about a year, right? Greater level of digital competency in order to continue their business, right? I suppose it's now more difficult than ever to recruit employees with valuable digital skills, as these are now in short supply, and we're definitely seeing this, and a lot of this is caused by the pandemic as well. Employers are relying on employees with a greater competency in digital skills, and because of that, it's driving a skills vacuum in the market as well. So it's becoming quite difficult to attract talent with these, or employees with these skills as well, right? So that will again drive the need for upskilling your existing employee base as well, right? To take on these new skills, process models, etc. As I mentioned previously, the pace of technology change is off the charts, and again, this was very, very kind of dramatic pre-COVID. We're seeing new types of technology emerging very, very quickly. This shows no sign of slowing down. I think the pace of change that we've seen in the last 5 years, even pre-COVID, has been dramatic, but that has gone to another level completely, again, because of COVID, right? And the need for businesses to adopt new digital models without following their standard onboarding process, given the proper testing time, etc., has been quite dramatic, right? So that's driving an increased need for additional uptake and additional skills as well. And then I suppose lastly, from an employee retention perspective, when we talk about training and digital upskilling, it's going to be seen as a way of improving that retention as well. It shows, just like any other training, it shows that you're invested in that employee. And just some brief points related to that. On the next slide, I just want to briefly talk about the role of IT in digital upskilling. So look, let's say selfishly from an IT perspective, I just wanted to highlight this as well. So traditionally, IT was very much seen as, keep the lights on organization. They kept the network moving, they kept, your email working, etc. Right? And I suppose very quickly we moved into this kind of business partner type role, right, where we were enabling, systems that drove business efficiency, right, across functions like sales and marketing, supply chain, etc., right. And from a digital skills perspective, this demanded a more competent end user and drove the need for significant upskilling across a wide variety of business functions, right. So if you consider, the implementation of, as I said, sales and marketing systems, ERP systems, etc., it drove a need for users to be far more competent with platforms like basic platforms like Excel, etc., but going into the more complex platforms like those digital marketing, right? So it drove a need for that skill level to move up a notch, as well as the IT and business partner organization developed out, right? And then I suppose the era that we're in right now is, from a technology perspective, is that the tools that are now coming to market, it'll be vital for businesses to upskill those employees yet again in order to reap the benefits. And I think these tools are in the space of, automation, analytics, etc., right? And they're not necessarily tools for IT any longer. We're now putting the power back in the hands of the user, because a lot of these tools are so consumer friendly, I would say. Let's say we've seen with a lot of the sales and marketing solutions, for example, right, in the past, they were something that you could go and buy with a credit card and stand up. From a user perspective, you didn't necessarily need an IT organization. And we're starting to see a shift there as well in terms of the new technologies that are emerging today, right? And we hear an awful lot about automation, for example, and there's a lot of automation platforms out there at the moment that don't necessarily need an IT organization. You just need a fairly competent end user to be able to go and implement them as well, right? So it's not a very heavy IT implementation, right? So I think that the role of IT here is kind of moving, the lines between IT and the business functions is blurred more than ever now, and these tools are becoming far more consumer friendly than they have been. On the next slide, then I just want to briefly kind of talk through, some very, very quick steps in terms of how to undertake a upskilling program. And I'll just talk about this in the reference, in the frame of mind around how we did it from an IT at Cork perspective when you look at our skill network. So I suppose the first step here is to really understand the gaps that exist in the organization. I suppose that this is vital when you compare this against the company's strategy, right, as it allows you to kind of prioritize the skills needed in the years ahead for your organization, right, and doing maybe a skills mapping exercise as well to see, do those skills exist elsewhere within the organization. And again, there are platforms out there that'll allow you to kind of survey your internal employees as well, and as projects are kicking off, it'll allow you to understand where the skills are in the organization which are needed for that project as well, right? So I think this is a vital step in terms of the digital upskill program. The next piece there is about the sequencing of learning. So I think this is vitally important in my opinion, right, as this is what really breaks the bad habits. Look, I'm sure a lot of us on this webinar this morning, right, we've all signed up to courses that take part over 2 to 3 weeks in the past, right, and we struggle to apply, those learnings back into the workplace, right, because when we return back into the office, those learnings go out the window. And I think the sequencing of learning here is very effective when we build it around the job itself, right? And this is the most effective way to break the bad habits, right? And what I mean by this is small bite-sized chunks of learning that you can kind of do on the job as well, right? And there are resources out there as well. And I think we're going to hear from Microsoft here a little bit later this morning as well in terms of what they're doing in the space. Learning a la carte. So, I think this is particularly important when you're undertaking a digital upskill program, that it's agile and it suits the needs of the company, right, and the employee. And this is why resources like, I suppose what Microsoft are doing, and specifically around LinkedIn Learning, etc., are so vital and useful to organizations, as it allows for learning on demand rather than taking a 2 to 3 week chunk of learning in a very compact way, I suppose, and trying to squeeze everything into that 2 period rather than a year-long cycle of bite-sized learning is far more effective, I believe. And I suppose, let's say the fourth step, just like with the rollout of any new system, the champions are important, right? And this is also true with the rollout of a digital skills program, right? So champions are important to show the way and how those new skills can be applied across the enterprise as well, right? So again, as I said, look, again, just like the rollout of any new system, champions are vitally important as well to show the benefits, the use cases, the success stories that they've gained from being part of this program as well, right? And very valid as well in a digital upskilling program as well. And then the last step here is really just to show that this is a continuous loop. And honestly, if I had an image that was a circle, I would have used it. I just didn't have one. But it just goes to show that, look, that this is a continuous loop, right? And you can't assume that once you get this program to the end that you're done. As I said, with the emergence of so much technology on on an annual basis at the moment, right? This program is vital to keep continuing on this vicious cycle. And as teacher program, you go back, you reassess it again, and how does that tie in to the 3-year strategy you might have, and also what new technologies are coming to market that you might be able to avail of, and how do you go and upskill those employees to take advantage. I promise I just have 2 other slides here. So when I look at the IT at Cork digital skills focus, right? So we have, let's say within IT at Cork, we partner with SkillNet Ireland, and we have an IT at Cork SkillNet network in place at the moment, and we've had it for a large number of years, right? So as Cleona mentioned at the start, IT at Cork is a member organization, and we have about 230 members, ranging from large multinationals right down to the small individual contributors, right? So quite a broad range, right? And a lot of those members have been leveraging our IT at Cork SkillNet network for, I suppose, since its establishment, right? And as part of our annual strategy, right, when we kind of look forward in terms of what are the skills needs out there, we really adopt what I just presented on the last slide. So when we look at the approach of our learning network, which is the SkillNet, we regularly discuss the training needs with our members, right? And we do this via, maybe interviews or surveys, etc. And we use this to create the pipeline of activities that are needed, or let's say the activities that we have already been doing that potentially need to be amended because there are new technologies coming to market as well, and we can do things better. If we need to develop a new program, we do this with some industry partners like the Irish Management Institute, which we just did one last year, or specialist organizations when you look at programs like cyber, etc. as well, right? So we kind of go out to our network and we kind of figure out who we need to work with to go and develop the program to address the needs of the member organizations. And I suppose just lastly, once developed, then we bring it to market under the IT at Cork SkillNet network. And look, this is something then that we can ultimately market nationally as well, right? And other SkillNet networks across Ireland can take advantage of what we have developed as well here, right? I promise this is my last slide, and I will move on. I think Cleona was going to shout at me, so I'm nearly there, I promise. So when I look at I suppose the last few quarters, or for the last year for IT at Cork SkillNet, in terms of taking this approach, right, what we actually developed was in Q1 2020, based on the needs that we had from our members in 2019, we went and we launched a new technology leadership course with partnering with the IMI and SkillNet Ireland. And again, this was around taking our existing maybe individual contributors that you would have within IT organizations or multinational companies or SMEs across the region, and going and upskilling them to take on leadership roles as well, right? And there are a lot of digital skills that are required to take on those leadership roles as well. In Q2 2020, again, based on the needs of our members, because there was a cyber skills gap, we launched a cyber talent program. And this was primarily focused at, well, I suppose initially we managed to get 10 migrant women into this course as well, and we upskilled them, and they weren't necessarily coming from a cyber background previously, but we upskilled them to go and take a role in cyber, which again will cement the industry here in the region, which is very, very strong, right, but did have a skills gap. In Q4, on the back of the cyber skills program, we launched CyberQuest, and this was around upskilling about 250 people into a role in cyber as well, right? So again, addressing the skills gap that exists, right? And this doesn't necessarily need to be people from IT. It could be people, who were, in the unfortunate maybe Debenham situation, for example. They had an interest in IT. They could come and be part of our program and be upskilled. And also it could be people within existing organizations looking for a bit of a career change within that organization and coming and being part of this program and upskilling themselves. In Q4, we launched the second round of the technology leadership course, which has a very, very strong demand. And again, going into this year, we'll have another cycle of it. Tomorrow, we're doing our revision of the 3-year strategy program. So again, looking at the needs that we had of our members in 2020 and how does that feed into our 2021 plan. And lastly, then just a kind of snippet in terms of what we will ultimately be aiming to launch this year as well, right? We look at areas like automation, just one example, looking at trying to launch something like an automation for all program. As I said, automation is not just a skill that is needed within IT, it's a skill that's needed within supply chain. No signs of stopping, right? So part of our program going forward, we'll be looking to launch something like this. And again, it kind of just shows that the lines between IT and business functions are yet again blurred. So folks, that's all I have. Cleona, sorry, I probably went over a little bit, right? But that's all I have for now. And thank thank you for giving me the last few minutes.
Not at all. That was really interesting and valuable. So thank you so much, Anthony. And sorry for rushing you a little bit there at the end, but really appreciate that. And we'll hold all our questions until that last half an hour. So thanks a million. So now I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our next and second speaker, Lurlene Duggan. Lurlene is currently the Microsoft Chief Learning Officer for Western Europe. As a lot of you will know, the Microsoft mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And Lurlene is at the center of this transformation, focusing on employees, on customers, on partners, and on future generations. Lurlene leads a team of program managers who drive this transformation with their employees and their customers and partners. So the presentation today is transformation through learning, and we're very much looking forward to this, Lurlene. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. Can you see my screen okay?
We can.
Excellent. So yeah, so great introduction. Thanks, Cliona. Yeah, and I suppose going back, before I start, I'm reflecting on what Anthony has just shared. And, you know, my role, the Chief Learning Officer, it sounds more impressive than it probably is, but at the end of the day, that role didn't exist. Certainly in Microsoft, it didn't exist 2 years ago. We had lots of focus on internal learning, we had lots of focus on partner learning, but we never really had that clean, linear objective of reskilling our own organizations and our partners and indeed our customers to drive a change. And if we think about digital transformation at its nucleus, you can't change unless you actually move forward and bring your teams with you. So just bear with me for a second. For some reason, my slides are not moving. Sorry. Just bear with me 1 second now. I'm not quite sure what's happening here. There we go. So this quote, you know, if we're going to grow, we have to change. And if we're going to change, we have to learn. We're very fortunate in Microsoft to have, you know, our most recent CEO, Satya Nadella, opened, you know, his main objective about empowering every person to do great things. And through that mission statement and having that clarity, we were able to anchor on what that really meant. And it really did drive a change in culture. Now, it wasn't easy and it's ongoing and it's a massive task. And when we think about the area that I cover, you know, and one of our main objectives was to look at our own employees and to ensure that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the slides are not moving yet. So I don't know if you.
Yeah, Lurlene, I think you might have to start the presentation slides again, maybe from beginning, because we're seeing the kind of, we're seeing all the background details that you would see if you know.
And your notes, yeah.
Oh, okay, hang on 1 second. Let me just share my other screen.
Thanks, Lurlene. Sorry for interrupting you.
You know, no, you're fine. But this, I'll say to everybody on, this is what happens when you use Teams and not Zoom, right? So
Yeah.
I'll just give me 1 second now and we'll go again. Can we see now?
Yeah, that looks.
I'm not sure it is, to be honest. I don't know if Vanessa, if you want to share my slides, it might be a bit easier.
Yes, Lurlene, give me 1 second.
And Arlene, while Vanessa's getting them up, we interrupted you in the middle of a nice quote there. So if you want to continue on.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to try this once more, folks. I'm not sure why it's not sharing. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you play that presentation, I'd say we'll see it in full.
No, it's really weird. It's just kind of stopped. I'd say I might need to I'd say, Vanessa, if you can share it for me, that'd be better. Yeah, so look, let me continue. I think at the end of the day, you have a Yeah, so an organization in Western Europe, you know, in the area that I cover, we've had to and have accomplished reskilling employees, over 4,000 employees with 7,000 technical certifications in 18 months. So if you think about that, that's multiples, people taking multiples of technical certifications, people that weren't in technical roles, right, that were in non-technical roles. So if you can flip to the next slide, Vanessa, thanks. So one of the anchors, though, that we do pivot on is around value generation. And, you know, again, Anthony alluded to this earlier, that if you know, an organization at its infancy thinks about what's the value that they're going to bring to a customer base, right? They look at it and say, you know, what do we want to sell? What do we want to create? And what does that actually mean? So just flip to the next one. So across value generation for us, we stood there and said, okay, let's evaluate this across 4 pillars: your vision, your strategy, your culture, your unique potential, and your capabilities. Your vision and your strategy, if I internalize that for Microsoft, it was very clear. We were there to enable people to do great things, right? To empower every person to do great things. And whether that for them was how to use Word, or whether it was to be, you know, a cloud architect, it was what was right for that person and ensuring accessibility to those people. And that was an underpinning foundation. Our culture, leaders play a huge role in this, right? And if you think about a culture of feedback, a culture of sharing, a culture of learning for others, a culture of reward for learning, it again has seen a dynamic change in our organization. And we do things like reward for learning. We compensate even to some levels for people who will do something really well and then share that with their peers or their wider teams. Then we look at that unique potential, that USP. What's the differentiator, and how can you unlock that further, and how will that amplify the value it creates? So if you have one person who's super at doing one thing, how do you take that and amplify it across other areas? And then, of course, the last one, and again, Anthony absolutely said this, it's your capabilities. What are your existing capabilities today, and what will they look like going forward? And what's the gap, the delta that you need to bridge? 74%, and this is from a McKinsey report that we commissioned, 74% of employees are actually willing to reskill if it means that they will keep their job or that they will grow in their job. Now, that's, you know, sometimes we think, well, we don't really have that skill set, but I'll talk in a moment about some of the things that we know we do have. So next slide, if that's please. And I'm conscious trying to catch up on time now. Thanks, Vanessa. So a lot of people, when they think about digital transformation, they think about technology. But again, Anthony, you know, you were like my warm-up act. The technology is only one small part of it. It's down to the people. And not all decisions will be made in IT either, right? So whether it's a HR director that wants to source people faster and wants to retain people better, there's technology that can help with that. Whether it's the CFO that wants some data analytics on spikes and what sells well at whatever periods to help them to drive their workforce to be ready for a billing cycle, as an example, that's technology. But none of those things can happen unless you've the people, and the people have been trained to get ready for that change. Next slide. So kind of for me, where the rubber hits the road really is across these 5 pillars. As leaders, you know, we need to make sure that we have compelling, it's constructive, and it's convenient. And I think, you know, when we build that learning culture, it has to be compelling. There has to be a reason why people want to do it. And I think that really sits into what your company's mission statement is, and how that mission statement aligns to creating value for your customer base. But building that learning culture, building that culture of reward for learning, of celebration, is so important. And we did some work with the Neuroscience Institute in Harvard, where they had done extensive research on, you know, the neuroscience behind learning. And one of the key accelerators is rewarding people for learning, acknowledging that they learn it. I mean, let's face it, the graduation of a student who's just completed their degree is a big deal. But, you know, a working mother with 3 kids who manages to do an online course over 3 weeks is also a big deal, right? And it's how you celebrate those can often drive others to aspire to do the same. One of the things that Microsoft has done, and I think done quite well over the last few years, is to build out a platform. So I've linked it here and Vanessa will share the slide, but we've a platform called MS Learn. Yeah, if you want to go and click to it, that would be super. It's accessible to everybody. It's accessible to everybody on this call. You can go in there, you can do some self-paced learning. You probably have to click to the internet, but don't worry, you can test it yourselves, because I'm sure we're stuck for time. But there are hundreds of certifications on there. And if you then look at our kind of, and I have it I'll send it to you, Vanessa, if you can share it. There's an initiative that Microsoft launched 6 months ago called the Global Skills Initiative. It's in partnership with LinkedIn Learning. It addresses 10 key roles that we know we need in the future. And it's everything from a data analyst to a graphic designer. But each of those 10 roles you can access the certifications that will allow your employees, or if you're challenged with people being laid off or being furloughed, you can send people to this Global Skills Initiative repository where they can take that free online content. And then for a significantly reduced amount of $15, and however that translates into euros, they can actually do the exams. So this is really Microsoft's response to COVID, to the pandemic, and how we are addressing that gap in the skills market. And because we know by FY22, we will not have enough people on the planet to meet the demand of our digital transformation. The other thing I'll highlight before I wrap up is we've got lots of managers out there. You guys are all sitting there going, how is data going to really help me? How is AI going to help me? Again, we partnered with INSEAD, the business school in Paris, and we've developed this AI business school. Now, I don't think it will, if you flip to the internet, you can get there, but the link is here. Again, it's a free module. You will get your certification at the end of it. You can pick it for your industry. So we've got one for financial services. There's one for manufacturing. And if you can go in there, it just helps business decision makers, non-technical business decision makers, to really understand the impact of AI and how it could potentially help your businesses. So it's a great one to just step back, take some time out, particularly with the challenges that we've seen in the last year, where we've been forced online. So that's kind of all from me today. Anthony referenced the self-directed learning and content creation. That's hugely important. If you have people that can do things and create things, share them within your teams, because again, that builds back to the build a learning and coaching culture and reward and recognition. Very fast. Sorry about the technical challenges. Not sure how that happened. Thanks a million.
Not a bother at all, Lurlene. These things happen to the best of us, as you well know. Thank you so much for that presentation. There's already one question coming in terms of how those roles were identified, I suppose, and we'll come back to that
Sure.
at the end of the 4 speakers. So thanks so much, Lurlene.
No problem.
Now, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our 3rd speaker, Professor Peter O'Brien from the Tyndall National Institute. Peter, you're so welcome, and we're really looking forward to your presentation. Title is Development of a European Education and Training Programme in Photonics and Advanced Systems. So just to give you a small bit of an introduction today to Peter, Professor Peter O'Brien is head of the Photonics Packaging Research Group at the Tyndall Institute here in Cork. He's also director of the PICSAP European Packaging Pilot Line, director of the European Photonics Innovation Academy, and Deputy Director of the SFI IPIC Photonics Centre. He previously founded and sold a photonics startup company and was a researcher at the California Institute of Technology and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Wow, Peter, I think I deserve a medal for pronouncing all those words. Very much looking forward to your presentation.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Can you hear me?
Hear you perfectly.
Yeah, and can you see my presentation?
We can.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So thanks very much. I'll try and keep it succinct as well. So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk. I give a lot of presentations, across Europe and across the world, and I suppose one of the challenges is to kind of, sometimes you don't focus much around your locality and even nationally, and people may not be aware of some of the really global impact that's actually going on in Cork. You know, in our area, it's photonics. Some of you may not be very familiar with that area, but it's really growing. And the previous speaker from Microsoft, we work very closely with Microsoft and many other companies in that space, in data centers, for example. And photonics is really having a big impact. I suppose the way you look at photonics, it's using light, but essentially it's where electronics was in the, say, 60s and 70s. So you can imagine, like, the microchip, the potential for growth in optics is, photonics is in the same space. It really is starting to take off. And I would say, without a doubt, Cork is a center of excellence in the world in that space. So what I want to talk about is training, because really it's a growth sector, as I've just said, but the workforce is not, doesn't exist really. So even hiring researchers, never mind workforce, is proving to be a real challenge. And that's something that we've been working on, and we've got a lot of funding. So firstly, I'll just explain what a pilot line is. So this was, again, one of the big challenges that the European Commission put to us in 2016, because there's a lot of research going on in Europe in this area. We probably lead globally in this sector, but there's a gap. It's often called the valley of death between research and industrialization. So a pilot line basically is where you kind of take results out of the lab and you bring it to more commercial status. And essentially what we did is we set up a pilot line with many leaders in Europe, smaller scale. And if you look at Europe, it tends to have much more SMEs, and Europe is very much focused on supporting SMEs and really pushing towards growth. So what we have here is a collection of leading kind of companies in that sector, and some of the big institutes like the Fraunhofers, and there's a number of large, like Leti, CA in France, and essentially it's all coordinated by us. So the technology and all of those kind of different aspects are coordinated by us. And the purpose is really, as I say, to take it from the research up to prototyping and piloting and bring it to manufacture. And it's the first of its kind in the world. And what I would say is that it's really taken off. We're working with around 150 companies around the world now. So it's not just in Europe, it's particularly in the US, a lot of interest in this, and also from Asia, Japan, China as well. And as I said, a big part of this thing is that what we wanted to do was, as these companies grow, we want to be able to train and hire, so they can hire new staff. But just before that, you might say, well, what is photonics? So I'll just very quickly give one or two quick examples. It's across many domains, like LiDAR in self-driving cars. So we work with General Motors, we work with you know, Toyota, some of those big companies, and there's a lot of startups in that sector, even actually one or two here in Cork. But here, this is a nice example. This is work we've been doing with a Dutch company in Airbus. So this is for aircraft monitoring, so the fuselage and the landing gear. Other areas are like in data centers, we're replacing copper cables with light fibers. So for example, in that sector, we work with Cisco, Intel, Microsoft, Samsung, and developing these very advanced systems. So again, to be able to develop these kind of tools, you have to have, or products, you have to have the staff to be able to do that. So we've got kind of three kind of activities in our pilot line. One is developing what we call standards for packaging. So developing these kind of means to be able to make these chips, these optical chips, and produce them. But also we have to be able to train and educate the workforce. And the final thing we do is, because it's kind of a little bit chaotic, to be honest, the way the industry is organized, we're trying to develop this ecosystem through standards and roadmaps. So if you go to the electronics world, if you look at the semiconductor world, like companies like Intel and make microchips, they have a roadmap for the next, say, 15 years, where the industry's going, what's needed, etc. So we're trying to develop that thing as well. And it kind of links in very nicely with the training. So one of the actual programs that we have, and it's been very much a hands-on program, which is obviously a challenge in these current times. We bring people in, so we actually bring them into our labs and we give them a hands-on training program. And that's been really successful. We have companies, one is dedicated towards PhD students and another is towards industry. So this is typically an industrial program around, say, 5 days. And we have a queue of companies and people who want to come in and learn all the different kind of things we can do. If you go on our website, pixap.eu, there's a very nice video there, and you can see all the different things we offer in that. And I would say, you know, I've worked in different labs around the world, you know, mentioned Caltech and places like that. There's nowhere like what we have in Tyndall. There's nowhere like the labs we have in Tyndall, especially in this sector for packaging. It's really advanced. We've had big investments from the European Commission and Science Foundation Ireland, which we're grateful for. So we put that to work, obviously through our research, but also through training. Now, another thing, and if I have a second, I'll show you at the end, we've got a new virtual reality program. So it's worth mentioning that Oculus and Facebook are in Cork, but there was a spin out from Tyndall, and that's now part of Facebook. And we've also had a new VR training program, and it's really impressive. It was my first experience personally of VR systems, but we've basically made a remote training capability in our lab. And when you wear the VR set, it is unbelievable. You really are sitting there doing the work in the lab. It's quite impressive, and it's really shown me that we need to develop up this a lot more. We've also initiated a new program in the US. So we basically started to collaborate more with a number of universities. So we've always had very strong links with Columbia and Berkeley, but MIT have a very good edX program. You're probably familiar with online training. So we're starting to kind of link in more with MIT, and also with a number of other universities. We've made training kits, so students and industry can start to learn how to use these tools. So you can see on the top left and on the top right, one developed with San Diego, UC San Diego, and the others with Columbia University. So again, these are starting to be built out, and what we developed, we're starting to kind of work with our partners in the US. This has actually been quite a success, and just recently we were approved by the European Commission to set up what's called a digital hub. So you're probably familiar maybe with the digital program in Europe. And these are quite, you know, it's essentially trying to reach out across all the different kind of regions in Europe and form this digital network. So there's one for photonics, and with some of our partners in Brussels, we've set up a new photonics digital hub. The first investment made by the Commission was 19 million. The pilot line is 15 million. These are big sums there because of the nature of the business. But we now lead the European Photonics Innovation Academy, and it's part of that Photonics Digital Hub. And again, it's taking what we've developed, and the idea is that we will host it in Cork. So I mentioned about our gateway in Cork, that we host the pilot line, but now we're going to host the Photonics Academy, where we'll have 50 top EU universities all across Europe, and it'll be managed through Cork, through Tyndall. So this is just one example. We have what we call an experience center. So people can come in for 3 days. This is just being prepared at the moment, so you'll see it online soon. As I say, it's just started. And you know, you come into the lab, you've got a 3-day course. So again, just very briefly, you can see all the different things you do and who's giving the course, etc. So again, this is a big initiative, large scale, and from a European perspective, it's centered in Cork. Really, from an optics point of view, you're going to hear a lot more about it in the future, and not just from the technical side, but also from the startup side, but the training and education side. We're really starting to lead that kind of area. And so I'll leave it at that. If I have a second, I'll just very briefly, I believe it's here. So if you go here, can you see my screen? So this is yeah, so here you can see the actual VR. This is actually on YouTube, but if you wear the headset, you're sitting there with the engineer. This is actually assembling a laser into a telecommunications module. And the great thing is you're actually in the lab, so you can actually see the whole lab. Well, this is one of our labs, and you're sitting there. Now, unfortunately, you obviously can't ask questions and things like that, but it's really cool. It's really, really impressive. So you know, what we do is we send out the headsets to people, and they can sit there, and we're developing up a whole set of training modules around this, and it's really impressive. It's like sitting in a movie theater. As I said, it's my first experience of this, but this is the way forward. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Wow, that's amazing, Peter. Absolutely fantastic. Congratulations for all you've achieved. And it sounds like very exciting times ahead as well. So well done, and thank you so much. Really enjoyed that VR experience, even for 30 seconds. So I can imagine that it would be unbelievable.
It really is very, very impressive. And it's only the start. Like the augmented reality is where we want to go, where you actually interface with the tools. We've got some programs. The Commissioner are quite excited about it as well. So I would say, you know, we can really make it a hub here in Cork to be able to develop this. So the other thing I want to point out, the investment made by SFI has been phenomenal. So it really put us in a global leading position.
Yeah, sure. You know,
Thanks.
that's essential, isn't it?
It is.
And yeah, I'd be really interested to hear, you know, when you mentioned about your hands-on training, and I suppose the role of VR and augmented reality in the future for all these types of hands-on training that we currently, you know, are struggling with in this kind of global pandemic.
It's from a business opportunity, but also from an educational opportunity. You know, it's a massive opportunity.
Huge, yeah, fantastic.
Yep.
So we might come back to that in a few
Very
minutes.
well.
Thanks so much. Now, so delighted to introduce our fourth and final speaker today, Kieran Delaney, Dr. Kieran Delaney from the Nimbus Research Centre in Munster Technological University. Kieran, your main interests are in exploring the challenges emerging in human-machine interaction and the impact of technology trends, such as IoT, and investigating new approaches to address some of these challenges. You graduated PhD from UCC in 1997, and you've worked in Tyndall before too. You're a key contributor to the foundation of the Nimbus Centre and its industry gateway. Really looking forward to this presentation, which is called the Future Skills Innovation of the Fit for FOF project. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Thank you so much, Kieran.
Thanks very much, Cliona. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is a European project. The acronym is Fit for FOF, Fit for the Factors of the Future. It is a coordinated action, which means that the idea is to assemble and develop new solutions, but also build capacity so that the outcomes of the project can support networking activities and support the sharing of new practices. And in this case, the focus is on enabling workers to be more adaptive and effective in learning, particularly in the context of kind of Industry 4.0 and Industry 5.0. The goal of the project is to make sense of the future skills requirements and to frame them in manageable structure and in the form of future job profiles that allows the transition to Industry 4.0 to be more practical. And with those skills descriptions and job profiles, which are really kind of filtered from a large landscape of available knowledge and information, we frame new educational approaches and drive a process that enables the learner or the worker on the shop floor to be more of a co-designer in these teaching and upskilling and change management activities. So that's a shift on the approach that which might be in place in more traditional settings. And it involves reshaping the dialogue between the key stakeholders to amplify the voice of the learner, but also to unlock things and allow and facilitate things between the stakeholders, which previous might not be possible. And as I said before, in the context of, let's say, developing these new practices, the goal then is to build the capacity and extend that on a European scale. The partnership, as you can see there from the map, spans a good portion of Europe. For Ireland, we have the benefit of Munster Technological University. I've actually forgotten to update the slide, so CIT is still in there, even though the phrase CIT has been consigned to the past. We're now Munster Technological University, and a partner in this is Boston Scientific, who've been very innovative in teaching and learning practices and workplace learning, and has actually been a catalyst for these initiatives. As you can see, there are a mix of educational partners and industry partners, including clusters supporting SMEs in Spain and Italy, and multinationals like Boston and Arctic. So when we're looking at trying to make sense of the skills space, one of the things that we're doing to acknowledge the fact that, let's say, if we do nothing, today's gaps between the existing know-how and technology, process trends, and current skill sets, those gaps will expand and increase if we don't do anything about it, if we don't make changes. We've already got a digitalization gap. We've got technologies like Internet of Things coming in. The gap is really set to widen if we don't kind of increase the level of intervention that's involved. In this project, what we're doing is we're developing knowledge management processes to make sense of the technology trends and the skills trends, and with a view to narrowing that gap. Now, what happens when you do that is you finish up with a very significant body of data on current skills initiatives, skills gaps, and a series of targets which are framed in the form of future job profiles or possible job profiles. An example of which is that picture of the modern data scientist. And it keys back on some of the things that have been mentioned in earlier talks about future skills profiles or target jobs of the future. So making those more practically accessible, it really boils down to describing the skill sets and, for example, linking them back to learning processes which can yield ultimately new skills and certification. So making sense of that is the first element. There's a global aspect to this, but there's also a regional and organizational aspect, and these kind of work to interact together. To sort of break that down into elements that we can use more effectively, we've been building out models. So one of the models is really based on a generative learning construct, and it's been echoed in the previous talks, where by building on a knowledge of existing capacity and strengths, and seeing where your target is. So you crystallize your application target, your business target, and you understand the skills associated with that. You can then find practical pathways to navigate the change from where you are now to where you need to be. So that construct can be developed as a scaffold moving forward, and it's really the way we've been building the larger model. Now, the thing is, when you bring in the different perspectives of the stakeholders, things get more complicated quite quickly. You have the employers with the driving the business targets, trying to assess the future path and the future journey that the company is on. You have the learner kind of framed within that, looking from the context of their current role and what they need to do, ideally to enable the innovation required by the company as much as possible. Then you have other stakeholders like the education provider, whether it's an informal or a formal structure, again with a series of sort of capacities and sort of future targets, as it were. And when you expand the kind of framework, particularly looking at it from the point of a learner, and how that creates a dynamic within companies, you get a quite complex picture. This model is really what we're building on, from the perspective of the individual learner, but how you then develop and expand that, looking at mentoring activities, the community of learning that's appropriate for these kinds of initiatives, and then extending into knowledge building and the development of innovative solutions. So the idea here is that the worker can see that landscape and see further in terms of the horizon, and therefore is more readily able to influence the larger picture. So having an expanded framework gives us a landscape to work through. Now we need to be able to essentially drive forward, and this is really about creating a series of activities which are framed around a learning approach which is described through what we call communities of practice. So the idea is collaborative learning, but individuals and organizations can work specifically and practically step by step. So we have quite a detailed plan and an implementation process built, but it's really structured in 3 basic steps. The foresight and planning activity, then the development of design and co-design solutions, and piloting that, and then the transition to practice. Some fairly complex things going on under the hood, but that's the basic process, and then the scaffold around it, which I mentioned earlier, is designed to support and enable that. In testing this in the project, we're running industry pilots around discrete manufacturing opportunities with each of the industry pilot partners. So for example, we have initiatives in Boston Scientific and Cork around smart devices and around upskilling around some of their automation solutions, smart appliances with colleagues in Arctic and Romania, and then the two partners in Spain and Italy, who are really focused around clustering and combining the learning requirements of a number of companies together to build out what is a more complex picture of providing upskilling solutions, which I think echoes back to some of the initiatives that IT at Cork are driving. And in that context, I think we can look at Cork as being something of a leader in this space through some of the initiatives and the agility that we've shown in these activities. So practically speaking, we need to get from current skills and capabilities to our targeted change. And this is really about finding to channel a series of pathways and scenarios. So the co-design process and the preparing for it is really about determining which paths are likely to work versus which paths won't. And from that point of view, you can see the way this is structured. What it does is it frames a kind of a scaffold and also looks at the key points and key things that you need to know and the key decisions that need to be made to move step by step towards your intended upskilling target and the new application. Now, one of the things, even though this is a fairly complicated looking slide, one of the things that needs to happen here is that kind of scaffold and that process needs to be simplified. So one of the things that we're doing is we're actually developing co-design processes which can be run face-to-face or fully online as required, where you can work through these steps. You can work through the process of looking at the targets, the learning approaches, and build a design schedule, which you can then ultimately test. The key thing here is it's built in a format that enables all stakeholders to engage. It's simplified to the point where you can share information across the different stakeholder groups and then generate a dialogue, whether it's a workshop or something different, where you start off, you focus on the key elements of the change, building on the resources you have, and ultimately develop a practical schedule. And one of the key aspects of this is we want to be able to cross that threshold of making sure that the learning activities are implemented and activated within the workplace as much as possible, and then you can see the outcomes as you progress forward. So this co-design process allows and facilitates this relatively quickly once the pathfinding work has been developed, and this is something that is possible. It's something that SMEs do, large enterprises do to a greater or less extent quite well. It's more challenging for SMEs. So in this context, we're looking at applying this model within clusters. We're looking at combinations of different companies with different needs coming together, but still achieving the same change process. And so there's something of a series of initiatives happening this year in Italy and Spain, which we hope to migrate back to Ireland, looking at the practical approaches for achieving educational solutions using these models targeted at SMEs and groups of SMEs working together. The next step, and this kind of wraps up the presentation, as we build out and share these practices, the idea is to extend and increase our collaborative capacity. So this goes back to one of the reasons why we had the partnership sketched across Europe, was to have a European reach, quite readily available within the project, but also now building a community through our initiatives, sharing of knowledge, and also through our web interfaces, through LinkedIn, etc., is an active part of what we're doing next. So it's something I invite people to kind of participate in, because as well as sharing information on the co-design process we're describing here, you can also influence it. This to us is a prototype which we're looking to make as applicable as possible across a variety of different domains, not just in the manufacturing sector, but exploring how to transfer it and translate it to address digitization challenges that we face across the larger society. So while our focus on the workforce is framed within this project, this community is actually looking at leveraging these approaches more broadly, and making sure that the dynamics that we create are as effective as possible. So on that note, after that quick tour of the project, I'll stop there.